Hi, this is Chapter 9, The Midnight Duel. Um, this is, these are the next few chapters I'll be reading, and I just want you to really take notes, or not necessarily take notes, but use your little scraps of paper and write down and put in the book things that make you think or make you, wonder. Like in the previous pages, I had wrote down I would be in the Humbledore. Uh, like, and then why did a few words? Why did Dumbledore say a few words? Knit, wet, blunder, and tweak. Why did? Is that what was supposed to be funny, or I was thinking like Harry, is he insane? Is he off the deep end? So just things like that, or even like, oh my gosh, this book is going so long. Why are they talking about this? Just write like little notes to yourself so that you can remember, so that you can have a conversation with your friends about that. Some of this is quite funny too. Um, and a lot of this is stuff that you and I don't normally think about. You know, I'm not a witch or a wizard. I don't think you are either, and all this is fantasy. And this is why we're doing the Harry Potter in this unit. Um, so let me start reading the chapter. The Midnight Duel. Harry had never believed that he would meet a boy he hated more than Dudley. But that was before he met Draco Malfoy. Still first year Gryffindors only had potions with the Slytherins, so they didn't have to put up with Malfoy much. Or at least they didn't until they spotted a notice pinned to the Gryffindors' common room that made them all groan. Flying lessons would start on Thursday, and Gryffindors and Slytherins would be learning together. Typically, said Harry darkly, just what I always wanted. It makes a fool of myself, to make my fool of myself on a broomstick in front of Malfoy. He had been looking forward to learning to fly more than anything else. He didn't know that you'll make a fool of yourself, said Ron. Usually, reasonably anyway. I know Malfoy always going on about how good he is at cribbage, but I bet that's all talk. Malfoy certainly didn't talk about flying a lot. He complained loudly about first years never getting on the house cribbage teams, and told long boasting stories about the way about that always seemed to end with him narrowly escaping muggles in helicopters. He wasn't the only one, though. The way Seamus Finnegan told it, he spent most of his childhood zooming around the countryside on his broomstick. Even Ron would tell everyone who would listen about the times he almost hit a hang glider on Charlie's old broom. Everybody from wizarding families talked about Quiggert constantly. Ron had always had a big, uh, had a big argument with Dean Thomas, who shared their dormitory, about soccer. Ron couldn't see what was exciting about a game with only one ball where no one was allowed to fly. Harry had caught Ron pondering Dean's poster of West Ham's soccer team, trying to make the players move. Neville had never been on a broomstick in his life because his grandmother had never let him near one. Privately, Harry felt she'd had a good reason, because Neville managed to have extraordinary number of accidents, even with both feet on the ground. Hermione Granger was almost as nervous about flying as Neville was. This was something you couldn't learn by heart out of a book, not that she had tried. At breakfast on Thursday, she bored them all stupid with flying tips she had gotten out of the library book called Quivet Through the Ages. Neville was hanging on to every word, desperate for anything that might help him hang on to the broomstick. Later, but everyone else was very pleased when Hermione's lecture uh, was interrupted by the arrival of mail. Harry hadn't a single letter since Hagrid's note, something that Malfoy had been quite quick to notice, of course. Malfoy's um, Eagle Owl was always bringing him packages of sweets from home, which he openly gloated at the Slytherin table. A barn owl bought Neville a small package from his grandmother. He opened it excitedly and showed them a glass ball the size of a large marble, which seemed to be filled with white smoke. It's a rememberall, he explained. Gran knows I forget things. This tells me that there's something that I had forgotten to do. Look, you hold it right like this, and if it turns red, uh, his face fell, because the rememberall had suddenly glowed scarlet. You've forgotten something. Neville was trying to remember what he had forgotten when Drago Malfoy, free, who was passing the Gryffindor table, snatched the rememberall out of his hand. Harry and Ron jumped to their feet. They were half hoping for the reason to fight Malfoy, but Professor Grimmauld, who could spot trouble quickly than any teacher in the school, was there in a flash. What's going on? Malfoy's got my rememberall, Professor. Scrawling Malfoy quickly dropped the rememberall back on the table. Just looking, he said, as he slumped away with Crabbe and Gaylor behind him. At 3:30 that afternoon, Harry and Ron and the other Gryffindors hurried down the front steps onto the ground for their first flying lesson. It was it was a clear, breezy day, and the grass rippled under their feet as they marched down the sloping lawns towards the smooth, flat lawn on the opposite side of the grounds to the to the forbidden forest where the trees were swaying darkly in the distance. The Slytherins were already there, and were 20, and so were 20 brooms lying near in neat little lines on the ground. Harry had heard Fred and George Weasley complain about the school brooms, saying that some of them started to vibrate if you fly too high and always flew slightly to the left. Their teacher, Madam Hooch, arrived. She had short gray hair and yellow eyes like a hawk. Well, what are you waiting for? She barked. Everyone stand by a broom. Come on, hurry up. Harry glanced down at his broom. It was old, and some of the twigs stuck out in odd angles. Stick your right hand over your broom, called Madame Hooch at the front, and say up. Up, everyone shouted. Harry's broom jumped into his hand at once, but it was one of the few that did. Hermione Granger's had simply rolled over on the ground, and Neville's hadn't moved at all. Perhaps brooms, like horses, could tell when you were afraid, thought Harry. There is a quiver in Neville's voice that said only too clearly that he wanted to keep his feet on the ground. Madam Hooch then showed them how to mount their brooms without sliding off the end, and walked up and down the rows, correcting their grips. Harry and Ron were delighted when she told Malfoy that he's been doing it wrong for years. Now, when I blow my whistle, you kick off the ground hard, said Madam Hooch. Keep your broom steady. raise a few feet, and then straight back down by leaning forward slightly. On my whistle. 2, 3, 2. But Neville, nervous and jumpy and frightened of being left on the ground, pushed off hard before the whistle had even touched Madam Hoot's lips. Come back, boy, she shouted, but Neville was rising straight up like a cork shot out of a bottle. 20 feet, 12 feet, 20 feet. Harry saw his his scared white face looked down as the ground falling away, saw him gasp, slip sideways off the broom, and whoom! A thud and a nasty crack, and Neville lay face down on the grass in a heap. His broomstick was still raising higher and higher, and started to drift lazily towards the forbidden forest and out of sight. Madam Hooch was bending over Neville, her face as white as his. Broken wrist, Harry heard her mutter. Come on, boy, it's all right. Up you get. She turned to the rest of the class. None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave these brooms where they are, or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch. Come on, dear. Neville, his face tear-struck, clutching his wrist, hobbled off with Madam Hooch, who had her arm around him. No sooner were we out of earshot than Malfoy bursted into laughter. Did you see his face? The giant lump. The other Slytherins joined in. Shut up, Malfoy, snapped Preble Petal. Oh, sticking up for for Longbottoms, said Pansy Parkinson, a short-faced Slytherin girl. Never thought you'd like fat little crybabies. Look, said Malfoy, darting forward and snatching something out of the grass. It's that stupid thing Longbottom's Grand sent him. The Remembrall glinted in the sun as he held it up. Give that here, Malfoy, said Harry quickly. Everybody stopped talking to watch. Malfoy smiled nastily. I think I'll leave it somewhere for Longbottom to find. How about up a tree? Give it here, Harry yelled. But Malfoy had leaped onto his broomstick and took off. He hadn't been lying. He could fly well. Hovering level with the treetop branches of an oak tree, he called, Come and get it, Potter. Harry grabbed his broom. No, shouted Hermione Granger. Madam Hooch told us not to move. You'll get us all into trouble. Harry ignored her. Blood was pounding in his ears. He mounted the broom and kicked hard against the ground, and up he soared in the air, rushing through his hair and robes, whipping about him. And in a rush to a fierce joy, he realized he's found something he could do without being taught. This was easy. This was wonderful. He pulled the broomstick up a little to take it even higher and heard screams and gasps of girls back on the ground and an admiring whoop from Ron. He turned his broomstick sharply to face Malfoy in midair. Malfoy looked stunned. Give it here, Harry called, or I'll knock you off your broom. Oh, yeah, said Malfoy, trying to sneer, but looking worried. Harry knew somehow what to do. He leaned forward and grasped the broom tight in both hands, and it shot forward. It shot towards Malfoy like a javelin. Malfoy only had got out of the way in time. Harry made a sharp about face and held the broom steady. A few people below were clapping. No, Crabbe and Gaylor Up here to save your neck, Malfoy, Harry called. The same thought seemed to have struck Malfoy. Catch it if you can, then, he shouted, and threw the glass ball high into the air and streaked down towards the ground. Harry saw, as though in slow motion, the ball rise up in the air and then start to fall. He leaned forward and pointed his broom handle down. Next second, he was gathering speed in a steep dive, racing the ball, wind whistling in his ears, mingled with the screams of people watching. He stretched out his hand. A foot from the ground, he caught it just in time to pull the broom straight as he toppled gently onto the grass with the rememberalls clutched safely in his fist. Harry Potter! His heart sank faster than he just dived. Professor Granagall was running towards them. He got to his feet trembling. Never in all my time at Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall was almost speechless with shock, and her glasses uh, flashed fiercely. How dare you? Might have broken your neck. It wasn't his fault, Professor. Be quiet, Miss Petal, Petal. But Malfoy, that's enough, Mr. Wesley. Potter, follow me now. Harry caught sight of Malfoy, Crabbe, and Gaylor, triumphant faces as he left, walking numbly in Professor McGonagall's wake as she strolled towards the castle. He was going to be expelled. He just knew it. He wanted to say something to defend himself, but those seemed to be something wrong with it. But there seemed to be something wrong with his voice. Professor McGonagall was sweeping along without even looking at him. He had to jog to keep up with her. Now he's done it. He hadn't even lasted 2 weeks. He'd be packing his bags in 10 minutes. What will the Dursleys say when he turned up on the doorstep? Up the front steps, up the marble staircase inside, and still Professor didn't say a word to him. She wrenched open a door and marched along corridors with Harry toting miserably behind her. Maybe she was taking him to Dumbledore, he thought, of Hagrid, expelled, but allowed to stay as groundskeeper. Perhaps he could be Hagrid's assistant. His stomach twisted as he imagined it, watching Ron and the others becoming wizards while he stumbled around the grounds carrying Hagrid's bag. Professor stopped outside the classroom. She opened the door and poked her head inside. Excuse me, Professor Flickwick. Could I borrow wood for a moment? Wood? Thought Harry, bewildered. Was wood a cane she was going to use on him? But Wood turned out to be a person, a burly fifth-year boy who came out of Flitwick's class looking confused. Follow me, you two, said Professor, and they marched up the corridor, Wood looking curiously at Harry. In here. Professor pointed them into a classroom that was empty except for Peeves, who was busy writing rude words on the blackboard. Out, Peeves, she barked. Peeves threw the chalk into the bin, which clanged loudly, and he swooped out cursing Professor, slamming the door behind him and turning to face the two boys. Potter, this is Oliver Wood. Wood, I found you a seeker. Wood's expression changed from puzzlement to delight. Are you serious, Professor? Absolutely. Uh, Absolutely, said Professor crisply. The boy's a natural. I've never seen anything like it. Was that your first time on a broomstick, Potter? Harry nodded silently. He didn't have a clue what was going on, but he didn't seem to be expelled, and Some of the feeling started coming back into his legs. He caught that thing in his hand after a 50 feet dive, Professor McGonagall told Wood. Didn't even scratch himself. Charlie Wesley couldn't, couldn't have done it. Wood was now looking as though all his dreams had come true at once. Ever since ever seen a game of cribbage, Potter? He asked excitedly. Wood's captain of the uh, Gryffindor's team, said the professor. The professor explained. He's just the built for a seeker too, said Wood, now walking around Harry and staring at him. Light, speedy. We'll have to get him a decent broom, Professor. A Nimbus 2000 or a Queen Sweep 7, I'd say. I shall speak to Professor Dumbledore and see if we can't bend the first year rule. Heavens knows we need a better team than last year's. Flattened us, flattened us in the last match by the Slytherins. I couldn't look um, Severus Snape's in the face for weeks. Cyrus Snape's. Professor peered sternly over her glasses at Harry. I want to hear you're training hard, Potter, or I'll change my mind and about punishing you. Then she suddenly smiled. Your father would have been proud, she said. He was an excellent cribbage player himself. You're joking. It was dinner time. Harry had finished telling Ron what had happened when he left the grounds with Professor. Ron had a piece of steak and kidney pie halfway to his mouth, but he'd forgotten all about it. Seeker, he said, but first years never. You must be the youngest house player in about a century, said Harry, shoving pie into his mouth. I felt particularly hungry. He felt particularly hungry after the excitement of the afternoon. Wood told me. Ron was amazed, so impressed he had just sat and gulped at Harry. I start training next week, said Harry. Only don't tell anyone. Wood wants to keep it a secret. Fred and George Wesley went now came into the hall, spotted Harry, and hurried over. Well done, said George in a low voice. Wood told us. We're on the class team too. Beaters. I tell you, you're. I tell you, we're going to win that cribbage cup for sure this year," said Fred. "We haven't won since Charlie left, but this year's team is going to be brilliant. You must be good, Harry." Wood was almost skipping when he told us. "Anyway, we've got to go. Lee Jordan reckons he's found a new secret passageway out of the school. But it's that one. I bet it's that one behind the statue of George, the Smothery that we found in our first week. See you." Fred and George had hardly disappeared when someone far less welcoming turned up. Malfoy, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle. "Having a last meal, Potter? When are you going to the train back to the Muggles?" "You're a lot braver now that you're back on the ground, and you've got your little friends with you," said Harry coolly. There was, of course, nothing at all little about Crabbe and Goyle. But as the high table was full of teachers, neither of them could do more than to crack their knuckles and scowl. "I'll take you on any time on your own," said Momfrey. "Tonight, if you want. Wizard's duel. Wands only. No contact." "What's the matter? Never heard of a wizard's duel before, I suppose?" "Of course he had," said Ron, wheeling around. "I'm his second. Who's yours?" Momfrey looked at Crabbe and Goyle, sizing them up. "Crabbe," he said. "Midnight, all right. We'll meet you in the trophy room. That's always unlocked." When Momfrey had gone, Ron and Harry looked at each other. What's a wizard duel? Said Harry. And what do you mean, you're my second? Well, a second. They're there to take over if you die, said Ron casually, getting stared at, getting stared at last on his cold plate, getting started at last on his cold pie. Catching the look on Ron's face, he added quickly, "But people only die in proper duels. You know where with real wizards. The most you and Momfrey will do will be able to do is send sparks to each other. Neither of you know enough about magic to do any real damage. I bet he expected you to refuse anyways. And what if I wave my wand and nothing happens? Throw it away and punch him in the nose, Ron suggested. Excuse me? They both looked up. It was Hermione Granger. Can't a person eat in peace? Said Ron. Hermione ignored him and spoke to Harry. I can't help overhearing what you and Malfoy were saying. Bet you could, Ron muttered. And you um, mustn't go wandering around the school at night. Think of the points you'll lose, Gryffindor, if you are caught. And you're bound to be. It's really very selfish of you. And it's really none of your business, said Harry. Goodbye, said Ron. All the same, it wasn't what you'd call the perfect end of the day. Harry thought as he lay awake, later listening to Dean and Seamus, Seamus falling asleep. Neville hadn't been back from the hospital wing. Ron had spent all evening giving him advice, such as, if he tries to curse you, you'd better dodge it because I don't remember how to block him. There was a good chance they're going to be getting caught by Flitch and Mrs. Nevis. And Harry felt he was pushing his luck, breaking another rule today. On the other hand, Marfrey's snarling face kept looming out of the darkness. This was his big chance to beat Malfoy face to face. He can't miss it. Half past 11, Ron muttered at last. We'd better go. He pulled his arm wardrobe, his bathrobes, picked up their wands, and crept across the tower room, down the spiral staircase, and into Greyford's common room. A few embers were still glowing in the fireplace. Turning around the armchair into hunched black shadows, they had about reached the portrait hole when a voice spoke from the chair nearest them. I can't believe that you're going to do this, Harry. A lamp flickered on. It was Hermione Granger wearing a pink bathrobe and a frown. You, said Ron furiously, go back to bed. I almost told your brother. Hermione snapped. Percy, he's a perfect. He'll put a stop to it. Harry couldn't believe anyone could be so interfering. Come on, he said to Ron. He pushed open the portrait of the fat lady and climbed through the hole. Hermione wasn't going to give up that easily. She followed Ron through the portrait hole, hissing at them like an angry goose. Don't you care about Gryffindors? Do you only care about yourself? All the points I got from the Professor McGonagall from knowing about the switching spells. Go away. All right, but I warned you. You just remember what I said when you're on the train home tomorrow. You're so, but what they were, they didn't find out. Hermione had turned to the portrait of the fat lady to get back inside and found herself facing an empty painting. The fat lady had gone on a nighttime visit, and Hermione was locked out of the Gryffindor tower. Now what am I going to do? She asked, shrilling. What's your problem? Said Ron. We've got to go. We're going to be late. They hadn't even reached the end of the corridor when Hermione caught up to them. I'm coming with you, she said. You're not. Did you think I'm going to stand out here and wait for Flitch to catch me? If he finds all three of us, I'll tell him the truth and that I was trying to stop you, and you blocked, and you can back me up. You've got some nerve, said Ron loudly. Shut up, both of you, Harry said sharply. I've heard something. It's sort of sniffling. Mrs. Nervous, um, breathed Ron, quibbling through the dark. It wasn't Mrs. Nivis, it was Neville. He had curled up on the floor, fast asleep, just jerked suddenly awake as they crept nearer. Thank goodness you found me. I've been out here for hours. I couldn't remember the new password to get to bed. Keep your voice down, Neville. The password is pig snout. But it won't help you now. The fat lady's gone off somewhere. How's your arm? Asked Harry. Fine, said Neville, showing them. Madame Perfumery mended it in about a minute. Good. Well, look, Neville, we've got to be somewhere. Would see you later. Don't leave me, said Neville, scrambling to his feet. I don't want to stay here alone. The Bloody Baron's been past twice already. Ron looked at his watch and then glared feverishly at Hermione and Neville. If either of you get us caught, I'll never rest until I've learned the curse of the Beggles Quarrel told us about. Quarrel had told us about it's till I use it on you. Hermione opened her mouth, perhaps to tell Ron exactly how to use the curse of the Beggles. But Harry hissed at her to be quiet and beckoned them all forward. They fluttered through corridors, stripped with bars of moonlight from the high windows. At every turn, Harry expected to run into Flitch or Mrs. Neville's. Miss, um, but they were lucky. They sped up the staircase to the third floor and tiptoed towards the trophy room. Malfoy and Crabbe weren't there yet. The crystal trophy cases glinted where the moonlight caught them. Cups, shields, plates, and statues winked silver and gold in the darkness. They edged along the walls, keeping their eyes on the doors at either end of the room. Harry took out his wand in case Malfoy leaped in and started at once. The minutes crept by. He's late. Maybe he chickened out, Ron whispered. Then a noise in the next room made them jump. Harry had only just raised his wand when they heard someone speak, and it wasn't Malfoy. Sniff around, my sweet. They might be lurking in the corner. It was Flitch, speaking to Miss Narvis. Horrid struck. Harry wove madly at the other three to follow him as quickly as possible. They scurried silently towards the door away from Flitch's voice. Neville's robes had barely whisked around the corner when they heard Flitch enter the trophy room. They're in here somewhere, they heard him mutter. Probably hiding. This way, Harry, mouthed to the others, and they began to creep down the long gallery full of suits of armors. They could hear Flitch getting nearer. Neville suddenly let out a frightening squeak and broke into a run. He tripped, grabbed Ron around the waist, and pulled them, and the pair of them toppled right into a suit of armor. The clinching and the clanging were enough to wake the whole castle. Run! Harry yelled, and the four of them sprinted down the gallery, not looking back to see whether Flitch was following. They swung around the doorposts and galloped down one quarter, then another, Harry in the lead, without any idea where they were or where they were going. They ripped through a tapestry and found themselves in a hidden passageway, hurtling along it, and came up near their charmed classroom, which they knew were miles away from the trophy room. I think we've lost him, Harry panted, leaning against the cold wall and wiping his forehead. Neville was bent, doubled over, wheezing and splattering. I told you, Hermione gasped, clutching the stitch in her chest. I told you. We've got to get back to Gryffindor's tower, said Ron, quickly as possible. Malfoy tricked you, Hermione said to Harry. You realize that, don't you? He was never going to meet you. Flitch knew someone who was going to be in the trophy room. Malfoy must have tipped him off. Harry thought she was probably right, but he wasn't going to tell her that. Let's go. It wasn't going to be that simple. They hadn't gone more than a dozen paces when the doorknob rattled and something came shooting out of the classroom in front of them. It was Peeves. He caught sight of them and gave a squall of delight. Shut up, Peeves, please. You'll get us thrown out. Clack, ple- um, Peeves cackled. Wandering around at midnight. Icky firsties. Tut, tut, tut. Naughty, naughty. You'll get caughty. Not if you don't give us away, Peeves. Please. Should tell Flitch, I should, said Peeves, in a saintly voice, but his eyes glittered wickedly. It's for your own good, you know. Get out of the way, snapped Ron, trying to swipe at Peeves. This was a big mistake. Students out of the bed, Peeves bellowed. Students out of the bed, down the charms corridor. Ducking under Peeves, they ran for their lives, right to the end of the corridor where they slammed into a door. It was locked. This is it, Ron moaned as they pushed helplessly at the door. We're done for. This is the end. They could hear footsteps. Flitch running as fast as he could towards Peeves' shouts. Oh, move over, Hermione snarled as she grabbed Harry's wand, tapped the lock, and whispered, Albamore. The lock clicked and the door swung open. They piled through it, shut it quickly, and pressed their ears against it, listening. Which way did they go, Peeves? Flitch was saying. Quick, tell me. Say please. Don't mess with me, Peeves. Now where did they go? Shan't, shan't say nothing if you don't say please, said Peeves in his annoying sing-song voice. All right, please. Nothing. Ha ha ha. Told you I wouldn't say nothing if you don't say please. Ha ha ha. And you heard, and they heard the sound of Peeves whooshing away and Flitch cursing in rage. He thinks this door is locked, Harry whispered. I think we'll be okay. Get off, Neville. And for Neville had been tugging on the sleeve of Harry's bathrobe for the last minute. What? Harry turned around and saw quite quickly what, for a moment, he was sure he had walked into a nightmare. This was too much, on top of everything else that happened so far. They weren't in a room as they were supposed to be. They were in a corridor, the forbidden corridor on the third floor, and now they knew why it was forbidden. They were looking straight into the eyes of a monstrous dog, a dog that had filled the whole space between ceiling and floor. It had 3 heads, 3 pairs of rolling mad eyes, 3 noses, twitching and quivering in their direction, 3 drooling mouths, saliva hanging in slippery ropes with yellowish fangs. It was standing quite still, all 6 eyes staring at them, and Harry knew that the only reason they weren't already dead was that their sudden appearance had taken it by surprise, but it was getting over it, and there was no mistaking what those thunderous growls meant. Harry gulped for the doorknob. Between flinch and death, he had taken flinch. They fell backwards. Harry slammed the door shut, and they ran. They almost flew down the corridor. Flitch must have hurried off to look for them somewhere else, because they didn't see him anywhere. But they hardly cared. All they wanted to do was put as much space as possible between them and that monster. They didn't stop running until they reached the portrait of the fat lady on the seventh floor. Where on earth have you been? She asked, looking at their bathrobes hanging off their shoulders and their flushed, sweaty faces. Never mind that. Pig snout, panted Harry, and the portrait swung forward. They scrabbled into the common room, and collapsed trembling into the armchairs. It was a while before any of them said anything. Neville, indeed, looked as if he'd never speak again. What do you think they were doing? Keeping a thing like that locked up in school? Said Ron finally. If any dog needs exercise, that one does. Hermione had got both her breath and her bad temper back again. You didn't see with your eyes, any of you, do you? She snapped. Didn't you see what he was standing on? The floor, Harry suggested. I wasn't looking at its feet. I was busy with its heads. No, not the floor. It was standing on a trapdoor. It obviously guarding something. She stood up, glared at them. I hope you're pleased with yourselves. We've all been killed, or worse, expelled. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to bed. Ron stared after her, his mouth open. No, you don't mind. No, we don't mind, he said. You'd think we dragged her along, wouldn't you? But Hermione had given Harry something else to think about as he climbed back into bed. The dog was guarding something. What had Haggard said? Gringotts was the safest place in the world for something you wanted to hide, except perhaps Hogwarts. It looked as though Harry had found out where the uh, where the grubby little package from the vault 713 was. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. That was quite interesting, hey? Um, Hopefully, we can read another chapter yet today. Thanks.